Welcome to Laura May Talks. I'm your host, Laura, and today I chat with my sister Fiona about AI. Hi, Fiona. Thanks for joining me for today's podcast.
Hi, Laura. Good to be here, as always.
A trend that our listeners may have noticed right now is that people talking about whether AI is more a positive thing in our lives or a negative one. Today, we're kind of focusing on how this is becoming prevalent in business and for many types of artists. An AI website that I've actually taken a look at myself that you may have heard of is ChatGPT. I personally use this for probably not really art-related use as such, but I have relied on it for some general overviews of things like a cover letter, just for a specific role maybe. But I always tend to tweak it and go over it as much as possible just to make sure things like grammar, types of words that are used in my own words, I guess, or similar to something I would write that has a better flow. But you don't want it to be too drawn out because it can get quite convoluted. If you've ever used it, you may have seen that yourself. Yes. There are, I guess, many different types of AI websites and different varieties of AI software. And I'm only just starting to understand or learn about them myself. But today I'm going to refer to some articles or videos. I will include some notes or something at the end of the podcast if anyone's interested in checking those out. There is one website I will mention that I found quite interesting. Fiona, you might find this interesting as well. That does give regular updates actually on free AI websites you can access, and it's called bestfreeaiwebsites.com, and it tends to give updates regularly of like what the current trends are, but not just trends. Apparently the man who created it talks about trying to, I guess, cull it down to ones that are, I guess, more user-friendly or are the better versions out there. So that's a really handy little link I found. Mm-hmm. But before I get into the main questions I have for you, Fiona, there was an example you mentioned when we were chatting earlier about Nick Cave, the artist, and a fan using ChatGPT. Could you share a bit about that with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So he has his Red Hand Files, which is a website where his fans send him letters, and he had one excitedly send him a ChatGPT version of a Nick Cave song. So essentially, the fan had asked ChatGPT to write a song in the style of Nick Cave. And Nick's response was that he'd had many of those sent to him, sort of dozens of them sent to him over the time, and it's worth reading, it's quite funny. But he's not too keen on it, and he's not quite sure if it's a useful tool or if it's the end of times, and so he gravitates somewhere between the two of those things. But I think, what did he say? He said. You said something about, the language in the song was about fire and hell in my eyes. And you said, yes, that's true. I have got fire and hell in my eyes, and it's ChatGPT. So, yes, it was quite funny. But I just thought, he's a lot of people. I don't know why it's particularly his songs, but people have all been playing around with it. And he's not a big fan yet.
No. Oh, well, it's always good to hear different perspectives on it, especially artists like Nick Cave. Yes. Great artist.
Yes.
So I guess going back to some questions I had for you, Fiona, as someone who runs a business, I guess, how have you found AI has benefited you maybe in recent months, if you want to refer to something specific or anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah, sure. And to be honest, I'm not using it enough, but the areas where I have used it, I certainly have been playing around with ChatGPT, and it's quite handy in things like if I need to write an article about something, sometimes it'll give me an outline. I certainly don't rely on the accuracy of the information. You cannot rely on it for that. But it just gives you a good outline or gives you a direction to go in. Or sometimes, say, if you're writing an article and, maybe you've written 1,000 words and it's got to be 800, or you need another 200 or whatever, you can ask it to increase the words or decrease the words, that kind of thing.
Mm.
One thing I've noticed though is I haven't really spent enough time on it. And I think if you spend a lot of time with it, you really train it to be more in your voice,
Mhm.
and then it's less editing you have to do. And I haven't gotten that far yet, but definitely you need to sort of edit it because you just can't rely on one, its accuracy, and two, it's very flowery. And I find the same. I use an app on a podcast on Buzzsprout, podcast hosting website, and it comes up with the ideas for my socials and for the show notes, and the show notes are very flowery, like every episode is the best episode that you've ever heard in your whole life, is that this kind of language.
Yeah.
So the stuff I've used so far, I find that it's kind of handy, and it's helpful, but it's also limited, and it's
Mm.
more of a guideline or a support rather than something you completely rely on.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. But yeah, it sounds like even though you're yet to utilize it as much as you'd like, it has been useful at times. So
Yeah.
exciting things there for your business ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And look, the other thing that I'm exploring a little bit, but I'm a little bit nervous about, is a lot of softwares, meeting softwares, are starting to create an AI, some sort of AI that basically records and summarizes your meeting. So at the
Mm,
end of the meeting, it says, "Okay, this is what you talked about. Here are the top points, and here are the dot points or something, and here are the takeaways." And
mm,
that kind of is exciting, but it's also a little bit, because it's also being used now in some software for people doing consultations, like health type consultations, and that
mm,
seems a little bit more tricky to me as far as ethics. But
mm.
yeah, I could see it could be really handy in some of these things, but there's that balance, isn't there? That balance between, it's really handy, but do I really want it listening in? Like, it's that kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kinda torn between those 2 places with some of the aspects of it.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. And even just hearing you talk about that, in my mind, I'm thinking privacy. Where does the privacy come into that? And
Yes.
I mean, I know you can get permissions for people to say, oh, yeah, well, I'm happy for you to record, whatever.
Mm.
But do we fully know, or do the patients or whoever's using it actually fully know what that entails? Like what is recorded and where is it stored, that sort of thing, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we had the issue come up a couple of weeks ago because I'm in a business networking group, and we have smaller groups within that group who meet and regularly talk about our issues. And it's quite a private conversation where we're really kind of laying it out there with what's going on in our business, and things that maybe we wouldn't want other people to hear. And
Yeah.
what I noticed is some people, their autopilot type things are just automatically joining the meeting and
Mm.
starting to record.
Ooh.
And I noticed that and kind of brought it up and said, "Hang on, no, we're all talking about our private business stuff here, and
Yeah.
so and so, who's maybe not even at the meeting, his AI is recording it, and it's going to be, where's that going to be stored?
Yep.
Where's it going to be stored? How's it going to be stored? How long is it going to be stored for? Who's going to, that sort of thing." So yeah, it came up in that situation, and we made a decision that we didn't want any of those recording our meetings because no one could feel safe talking about those issues in what used to be private. Now suddenly it's people's AI joining the meeting.
Yeah, that's an interesting change of events that people may not consider sometimes when trying to put these initiatives of AI use in meetings and things, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's going to change. It's going to be about policies. There's going to have to be new policies created throughout businesses and groups and whatever in regards to how these things are used. And people will need to be opting in or opting out and sort of choosing whether or not if they think it's a benefit or if they think it's invasive. And that they're going to be discussions that are going to be happening everywhere, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Important discussions too, for sure. Um, Now, I guess you mentioned some specific uses already. Is there anything else you would like to mention, maybe that you're maybe thinking about doing with AI or anything like that?
I honestly don't think I fully discovered its potential yet. One thing I have heard people doing is say, so there's different, so ChatGPT, to my understanding, I could be wrong, but based on my understanding, it's about a couple of years old in regards to its information. There are some newer ones that are paid things that are a different brand. I can't remember what the other one's called, but I know another business person told me about it. That one's actually more kind of live. It kind of reads the internet now. I like the idea of that one because it's the sort of thing where you can say, but even with GPT, you can do this up until a couple of years ago. But things like, give me a summary of the such and such's book, or give me a summary of give me a brief history of the something or other that happened in the war, or give me a brief history of the discovery of whatever it is, I don't know, but just things like that to learn. So I think as a learning tool, it could be really, really useful. But then again, it's about where's it getting its information from? Because I know, without sort of getting political, that some of the different recent AIs that have come out, when they've been asked to talk about any kind of current political thing or even historic figures, they've been very dodgy to say it nicely in regards to what they spit out. So it's only ever as good as the way it's programmed, and if what people want to program it to be this, this side of politics, that side of politics, this believes, those believes, whatever it is, that's how it's going to be. But I think it would be really, really useful as a learning tool, and really useful for, it already is, but I think that up-to-date one, really useful, sort of saying, hey, check my competitors and see what they're doing in regards to socials or consultations or offers or whatever, and get it to sort of just help you see where you're at in the market and, be more competitive.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really interesting one, Fiona. Thanks for sharing that one with us. Now, just something I thought I would mention here. I found an article from Plymouth University when I asked Google the other day, and I kind of was just asking questions, and it came up with, is AI art really made by AI? And the Plymouth website states, AI art isn't original. AI generators use and merge pre-existing images to satisfy a user command. So that one came from a plymouth.ac.uk website. So I guess that kind of leads into some things I'd like to mention about, I guess, the disadvantages or negative outcomes of AI. So I might just share a bit about that before I go into something I've seen about an artist that talks about using AI and how he found it helpful. So I guess as an artist in music and singing, and someone who tends to do a lot of art-related things as well, I can see how AI might actually be useful to create maybe a concept, or perhaps to create or curate an idea if you're low on budget, or you need to create maybe an image for something and you can't afford to get a photographer or something like that. Well, it could be helpful, definitely. But an example that I've looked at recently, an artist who's kind of gone into using AI for his own purposes, is a man named Johnny Keeley. And in this particular video, which I'll share later, he lists basically using this app, or I don't know exactly what it is because I haven't used it myself, but it's called Udio, Udio AI, and he used it to help him create a song which he wrote some lyrics for. The outcome of the music and the audio had human vocals, or pre-recorded, obviously, that an AI created using that software, and it also had some music. And he said he found the melody he wanted after a number of attempts writing the descriptions of the emotions that he felt. So he actually found that to be helpful, but also I guess the disadvantages for me personally, I've noticed, just to name a few, overall were more around so as a musician or a singer, even if you have got basically all this great AI stuff going on, it kind of worries me that he's using an example of something that maybe isn't necessarily created by himself, I guess. I mean, you could definitely get ideas from it, yes, but at the end of the day, are you supporting artists or are you supporting AI? So I feel I'm a bit concerned about where that leads. Whilst it's very exciting and could be very helpful for someone who maybe isn't an artist who can't afford to get someone else to create something, definitely, for sure. But once again, it's also, I guess it's kind of taking away that sort of job or that right as an artist for people, like having opportunities to do that for you. So for people who can afford that sort of thing, to what end is it going to be helpful to just rely on AI for this sort of stuff? I mean, it goes a bit of a slippery slope, I think, between, human creation versus technological creations, which, as I was kind of referring to earlier, can be basically replicated from other things that it's got sourced from. So AI has many things that it might be fed information with, but at the end of the day, it's going to be an accumulation of whatever that is, and it's going to spit out something based on what it knows. So anyway, that's just some of the thoughts that I had around that, I guess.
Yeah, a couple of things that sort of I thought of when you were talking about that. One is that with copyright issue, because
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
hard enough already in art. Like, say in music, there's been so many court cases over the years where someone says that this other person stole my song, and sometimes it's very, very clear. Ice Ice Baby, that he definitely stole under pressure. But sometimes it's much more unclear because you know better than me. But there's only so many different ways that you can string a song together. So it wouldn't be, and we are, because you would have had to listen to nothing ever to not be inspired by anything. So when you are writing, it's not impossible that you could be being in. Excuse me, I nearly just tripped over my microphone then, but because I got excited. But you're being inspired, right? So you're being
Yeah.
inspired by what you listen to and what you know. How much is inspired and how much is stealing? And if you don't really remember, maybe you heard that song once 10 years ago, and suddenly you start writing something that's very similar. It wouldn't be hard to innocently do that to an extent. I can only imagine, more than if AI is doing it for you, whether it's a visual thing or a song or whatever it is, how do you know where it got it from? And how do you know how close it is to, like it says that it's not original, but then it's not, it's an amalgamation. But it seems to me a bit tricky from a copyright or sort of owning the art kind of point of view, that you don't really know where it came from. It's hard enough with human
Yes.
to not remember and kind of think that you're creating something and it was a song you heard 10 years ago that you forgot was a song. Well, how hard would it be if you weren't even sure where the concept came from?
That is an interesting point, isn't it? Yeah. Something
Yeah.
to be wary of, I think.
Yes, yeah. And
Um,
the other thing too is, always, haven't artists always been, unless you're at the absolute top of your game, haven't artists
yeah.
always been sort of undervalued? So it comes back to that whole, why do I need you when I can get ChatGPT to do it for me, or whichever.
Yeah, or whatever. Yeah, AI software you're using. Yeah.
I have a friend who's a copywriter, and she's lost a lot of work out of this, and she pivoted and has now become an AI trainer. So she teaches people how to, because there's actually job descriptions now. There's actual job descriptions of prompt. It's like, I can't remember the word, but it's the person who learns how to do ChatGPT prompts and to do that well. And so she's actually learned how to do that, and she teaches that. So she's managed to pivot from it. But, once upon a time, people would pay her for her skill at writing words. Now they pay her for her skill at teaching them how to teach ChatGPT to write the words. So, luckily she sort of pivoted, but for, again, the copywriters, that they were being paid for their skill and their art with words, and now they're not so much. So unless they've sort of pivoted and learned how to use the AI themselves. So it will be interesting to see what happens in the space of the arts over the next few years.
Definitely. Now, just before I move on to a final few questions for today, I just wanted to touch on, for people who maybe I'm more of a fan of AI. So I'm trying to give it a bit of a perspective as someone who is an artist and can see, I guess, where it could potentially be a bad thing for an artist, but also I can see, like with this video I've seen of Johnny Keeley, who got this AI to use and make a beautiful song, lovely. I do see what he's saying in terms of it being nice, definitely. But I guess something I would point out, and if anyone wants to go and watch it there in leisure, I'll include it later so you can check it out for yourself. But I felt, whilst the actual AI recording was good, I feel the emotions were quite lacking. So something that you may notice yourself. I mean, it's meant to be basically a computer spitting something out as close to a human as possible. But until I actually heard Johnny himself in this video doing a version of it himself, so he actually plays on the guitar and sings after playing the AI version that he's, I guess, used to create something for himself. I actually really loved his version, and it's the imperfections as well that make it so relatable, because you want to hear the raw emotions, you want to hear how it touches you and how it's touching him as a singer or an artist or anything that he's playing. It could be, no matter how well he plays, the imperfections are just as important as the perfect parts, I think.
Yeah, well, you see the same thing in human performance, don't you?
Yeah.
Because you could have several, and you and I have discussed this many, many times, and you're sitting down watching one of those TV shows or the auditions or whatever, and, you might see someone do the song absolutely perfectly,
Mm.
but you do not feel a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Next person comes in, they do it really imperfectly, but it's amazing and it touches your soul.
Yeah.
So it's the same idea, isn't it? So
Yeah.
essentially, the people who are more in touch with their themselves, their humanness, imperfect but really, really connected. That's
Mm.
what really
Mm.
moves you. So I don't think that, well, we're certainly not at a stage yet where AI can do that. And I
Yeah.
kind of, in a way, hope that it never can really, because it's
Yeah.
that's a bit too, it's a bridge too far for me right now. So
Yeah.
yeah, as a bit of
Yeah.
a structure maybe, but as something, yeah, I just
Mm.
don't think humans like stuff that they feel a connection to, and it
Totally.
is that imperfection, like you said, rather than the thing that's absolutely perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we wrap up today, Fiona, is there anything you'd like to note as a key takeaway for yourself from any points that you mentioned or I mentioned earlier before I mention mine?
Yeah, and there's one little extra thing I'd like to bring up,
Yeah.
a topic that I did not table beforehand. No, it's the young girls now, when they want to go and get plastic surgery,
Mm.
it's not pictures of their favorite model or whoever it is. Now it's AI pictures of themselves.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that's pretty scary now, because
Yeah.
we're growing up in this kind of online, on screen kind of world, and they're all using their filters and whatever it is, Snapchat and
Yeah.
and whatever. And so now they're quite used to the way they look filtered, and then they look in the mirror and they don't like what they see. So I think that's a pretty scary direction we're going in. But in general, I think that, look, it's here and it's here to stay. So I want to embrace it to a certain degree, but I do think we need to understand it and be really careful around it. And you certainly can't rely on it for accuracy. And it's a guide, or it's a support. Might give you a bit of structure, and it's sort of like having an assistant. But it's not. It's at the end of the day, your work has, whatever it is, whether it's art or whether it's something else, your work has to be you, and it's better if it's your voice and it kind of just supports you.
Yeah. Definitely. Well said. Well said. I guess uh, putting it in where what I've, I guess, taken away from today as an artist, I would say you can definitely utilize AI, as I mentioned earlier, for drafting something, but definitely create that final design yourself, kind of what you were just saying, Fiona, and anything you're using AI for. Yes, or, with another artist's help. So it's always important to collaborate and try and use that humanness,
Yes.
whilst it's great to have something to refer to, at the end of the day, artists, as humans, we need to support each other as artists, rather than just using things like ChatGPT or programs like Johnny did in the video. Let me just see here. Okay, so another thing I'd just mention off my final thoughts I'd like to add for today is that AI can be a slippery slope for our society, but it can be beneficial as well. And I hope this video and the audio, whichever you're listening to, helps our listeners to think on this topic. It's been an area of interest for many people, and hopefully for yourself if you're listening in. Maybe you were just keen to hear some of our thoughts or findings. Thank you for our chat today, Fiona. I'm glad we were able to share some thoughts here with our listeners, and thank you so much to our listeners for joining us. Until next time on Laura May Talks.